I now come in my look back at the Star Trek film franchise to one of the two films I mentioned back in my Star Trek V review as being even worse than that very bad but somehow oddly lovable, to me at least, film. Star Trek Generations. This is one of the two worst Star Trek films yet made, in my estimation. Unfortunately, it is also the first feature film episode for the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation, which was a terrific show, a very much loved show by Star Trek fans from my generation. For many of us, it was the Star Trek that we grew up with, the Star Trek that we knew while it was in production, even better than we knew the original series with Captain Kirk and Spock and Dr. McCoy, etc. So this movie, for people my age who were into Star Trek, was a really big deal when it came out because it came out the same year that the TV series wrapped up at the end of the seventh season. The series aired its last episode in May of 1994, and then around November of 1994, this first feature film released. So it was happening very quickly. The transition was straight from TV to film. And in addition to being the first next-gen movie, it was also a crossover film. It features members of the original cast, so you get those two shows coming together. This was just a huge deal. I was 14 when this movie opened in theaters, and it was just a major event for me because I had been a fan of Star Trek since I was, really since Next Generation started when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And had liked the movies and the episodes of the old show that I had seen before that. So this was a big deal for me. And at the time I was 14 and didn't know shit about shit when it came to films. It was just sort of starting to get into movies as a serious thing and form my palate, as it were, form my opinions about film. And I loved it. I thought it was a great movie. All I needed was to see Captain Kirk and Captain Picard on screen at the same time. And it was enough for me. And I think that's what the producers of the film were banking on. They figured, well, as long as we get Shatner and Patrick Stewart in the frame at the same time, in the uniforms together, the fans will be happy with it. And for, I guess, the 14-year-old fans, or the fans of the 14-year-old mentality, maybe that worked. But overall, the film was not very well received, and it was very poorly received by people who were not Star Trek fans and had not sort of been primed to accept it. And it's just, and looking back on it now, watching it as an adult, it's really a very, very poor movie. And it's unfortunate that it was the first film in the Next Generation section of the franchise, because that group of actors and that group of characters really did deserve better. I mean, there had been some truly awful episodes of Next Generation, some of which, to be fair, were worse than this movie is. But nonetheless, the show overall was of a very high quality on, as an average. And it deserved a better first cinematic episode than Star Trek Generations. And also, you also have to point out that, characters like Captain Kirk and Scotty and Chekhov, who are the representatives of the original crew in this film, deserved a better send-off, which they had actually gotten in the previous film. I mean, Star Trek VI was a beautiful goodbye to these characters, and then 3 of them get dragged back in for additional duty, and it's unfortunate that the last time we see these people is in this movie. So what is so bad about Star Trek Generations? Well, the one word that I feel best describes it, if I'm going to distill my review of the film down to a single word, it is the word mediocrity. This is not by any stretch one of the worst films ever made. It's not technically incompetent. It's not poorly acted. There's nothing that jumps out about it as slipshod or terrible. It's just sort of there. It's very mediocre. There's not a lot. You don't see a lot of effort. You don't see a lot of people trying to make a great film. You see kind of a lackluster paint-by-numbers script that just sort of comes up with a very lazy, obvious device for bringing the generations together. And beyond that, the plot is just kind of a generic action plot about a mad scientist who wants to destroy a planet and the Enterprise having to stop him. And they throw some Klingons in there too, because what the hell. And it just doesn't have any energy or any cleverness or any sense of invention or ingenuity or anything that you might expect from a film that is trying to launch a new phase of the franchise with these new characters and introduce these people from the television show to a film audience. It just doesn't feel special. It doesn't feel new or fresh or exciting. The actors, for the most part, seem bored. There are a few moments where Patrick Stewart comes alive. One of them is when he's crying, when he learns that his family has died in a fire. And he kind of breaks down and has a scene where he really just... And I feel bad for Patrick Stewart because, I mean, he's really just acting for the fences there. I mean, he's crying and then he kind of pulls himself together and he's trying to do the stiff upper lip thing. And he's really just acting the shit out of that scene. But it for what? You know, it's all that effort and all that training and all that attempt to be an actor in this film and to give this character this humanity and this realism, and it's just, I mean, for what? The movie is just such dog shit all around it, and even that scene itself is a little overplayed, and it's hard to say that is actually a really great scene. It's well performed by Patrick Stewart, but you know, but beyond that, everybody just kind of seems to be shuffling through, especially William Shatner and James Doohan and Walter Koenig as the original crew members, also known as Captain Kirk and the other two guys who said yes. Because as you may know if you're a Star Trek fan and you know a little bit about the history of the film, the original idea, the original concept was to bring the entire original crew back, or at the very least to bring back Kirk and Spock and McCoy, but it never happened because Leonard Nimoy just basically read the script and said, "No, I don't want to do it. Spock doesn't need to be there. He's just there saying lines. He doesn't really serve a function in the story." And DeForest Kelley, he made a similar decision that, look, this isn't worth coming back for. The part's not that good. So what they ended up doing was taking the lines they would have given Dr. McCoy and Spock and just sort of reassigning them to Scotty and Chekhov, because Walter Koenig and James Doohan were willing to come back and reprise their roles in the film. So you have this really random trio of original cast characters where you have Captain Kirk and then Scotty and Chekhov, who are suddenly like his two best buddies because Spock and Dr. McCoy are suspiciously absent. So you get a trio of classic Trek characters, but you don't get the classic trio of Kirk and Spock and McCoy. There is a guest star in this film, and all I can say is I am so grateful for the presence of Malcolm McDowell, because he is the exception to what I said previously about the performances being sort of dull and bored and perfunctory. He plays Dr. Soren, Dr. Tolian Soren, and he is the mad scientist who wants to get back into the nexus, the energy ribbon that contains this sort of timeless reality where you can just exist outside of time forever in your own fantasy world. He wants to get back into there because he was in there for a second, and then the Enterprise B pulled him out. Scotty, that prick, beamed him out. And he wants to get back in there, and he is just deliciously over-the-top evil, with that great British accent that he uses to wonderful campy effect, chewing scenery everywhere he sees it. It's just a wonderfully over-the-top, cartoonish villain performance. I can't call it good, but it is incredibly entertaining, and it's very, very welcome in this boring-ass, dull movie. Finally, the only other thing I guess really worth mentioning about Star Trek Generations is that it is the film where we see the death of Captain Kirk. Personally, I don't know if the death of Captain Kirk is something we ever really even needed to see. Like I said in Star Trek VI, I think it was a perfectly good send-off, just sort of having the ship fly off into the sunset. That would have been a perfectly fine place to leave them. If you did, for whatever reason, find some narrative advantage to killing Captain Kirk on screen, it's hard to imagine a worse way of doing it than in Star Trek Generations, where he is pulled out of his Nexus fantasy to beat up Malcolm McDowell with Captain Picard. And then he just gets, he falls off of a scaffold and down into like a rocky valley and just kind of dies. It's not a very. It's not only an anticlimactic, dramatically underwhelming death. Uh, it's not it's visually boring. It's not very satisfying for the character. It doesn't bring Kirk to any sort of interesting place to leave him. Like there's really no reason to do it other than to sort of tack some sort of significance onto the film. It just really doesn't work. It's a really and it's a shitty idea. The whole crossover between the casts feels half-assed and shitty because well, I mean once you got to the point of Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley and other members of the original, George Takei turned down an offered role as well, I believe. Once you get the original cast members saying, you know what, no, I don't want to do it. If you really want to do the crossover film at that point, to me, the obvious way to go is to come up with a better story, come up with a better script that will utilize these characters in a more meaningful way so the actors will want to come in. And if you're not going to do that, then just say the hell with it and just do a Next Generation movie and forget the crossover. But that's not the way they went. They went with Star Trek Generations, and like I say, not the worst film ever made, and not even the worst film in the franchise. We're still coming to that. But one of the worst films in the franchise. I would say the second worst film in the franchise, even worse than Star Trek V, because at least Star Trek V can be watched and enjoyed despite its badness. Star Trek Generations is just so mediocre that it's difficult to sit there and watch it and enjoy it as a bad movie. It's just kind of a dull, shitty movie.